Dad? An angel. An angel?
An angel. We're reconstructing a biblical view of angels and their place in God's kingdom. It's interesting that cherubim, we know more about them in Scripture than about any other angels as such. It's astonishing how much Scriptures speak about them, but in the same sense as well, how little we are told about them. Right? So they're the only ones that are actually described for how they look and all of those kind of things, and that's why they're incredibly overwhelming. But so much of what is given about them is given in the figurative sense. And I really believe it's like that throne room picture of God, saying, I'm showing you something that's just too big for you to comprehend, so let me say it's like this, and it's like that, and it sounds like this, and it looks like this. That's the kind of language we get around their description as well. So it's something that we have to keep in mind when we read it. God is using figures, or the prophets are using figures to try and explain to us what they saw, what they experienced, what they felt in those moments. So starting then at the beginning of the Bible, it's wonderful when you walk through book by book by book by book, how God gives more revelation, more revelation, more revelation. You see it in this as much as in any other story throughout the Bible. It really is like God is giving another detail to what he's speaking about. So they're the first angels as such that we meet in Scripture in the Garden of Eden when it says he drove out the man. And it's now after the fall. And at the east end of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. And that's as much as we get about it. Then he goes on with the story, all right? Just throws in this name. There's no description of what is a cherubim? What are they? And remember, just cherub is the singular of cherubim being the plural, all right? So there's a couple of cherubs that he places there to guard the way to the tree of life. So we have no picture given here of how do they look, where do they come from, what's the flaming sword? I mean, apart from the cherubim, what does that look like? But it's clearly you cannot come back here. And somehow these angelic beings are in between to guard the way. What was in the chapter just before? God walked with them in the garden, in this physical realm, having this relationship with God one-on-one. And suddenly now, because of sin, God says there's a role that these angels play as well. They're in between. And for what reason? We turn to the book of Revelation. Finally, we see what we will be there with the tree of life, eating from it freely in his presence. Everything is restored. We can then enjoy it. But in the meantime, we're in a sinful state. And God says, you cannot come in your sinful state to the tree of life. Things first must be restored. And in the interim, something has changed in the heavenlies in terms of our relationship. But no picture of how they look. How does that comprehend with you? It's because Moses wrote it. And he probably wrote it after he went up on the mountain and saw God in his glory and had some glimpse of what he had to come down and make. He knew what a cherubim looked like. Because he came down and told the artist, we're going to make the tabernacle. God says there has to be cherubs on this mercy seat. And in the veil, there needs to be something that looking like them that needs to be embroidered in. So he had a picture of it, and he wrote the book of Genesis. So he wrote it to people who actually had a tabernacle there, and he had pictures of these things in the temple, and the priest could come out and say, oh, you don't know what it is. It looks like this and this and this and this and this. Why? Because these pictures are up in the holy place. We see it when you go in. So over here, we just left with, well, that's what it is. All right? No description. Then when we move on, in the tabernacle itself, it's woven into the sides of the inner curtains. It's woven into the veil to the most holy place, that place that between the holy, where the priest could go, and where the high priest could go to the Ark of the Covenant, that where God speaks from the mercy seat. That veil very much speaks about what Genesis speaks about here. There's a veil, and what is in between? The cherubim. They're there in between, guarding the way to what? The tree of life. In the book of Revelation, the river runs from under the throne of God, and on both sides of it, there's the tree of life. So God is the life giver, all right? So a physical representation of what he's speaking about in the book of Genesis. Cherubim are there for a reason. They're guarding the way. And then bowing on the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And we're going to see that picture again and again as well. There in that place where God's glory is, because it says the high priest heard the voice of God speaking from that golden box. And on the golden box is two cherubim over there. And from there, God would speak to the high priest. So it's like an earthly representation of the throne room of God right there. And again, Ezekiel and John, they will see the cherubim around the glory of God there in the throne room. What is really important for us to see from this point on is who designed this tabernacle? God gave Moses the plans on the mountain and said, go down and make this thing. Make it as I showed you. And that's why we get it twice in the book of Exodus. One saying, do it like this. And afterwards, Moses walks through and he says, okay, they did it like this. They did it like this. Oh, they did it like that. Literally checking off every instruction to say they did it the way God said it to be done. So who wanted the representation of the cherubim in the tabernacle? God did. He wanted the people to know, here in my glory, there are beings that are awesome. He wanted the people to know there's a spiritual realm. And that's the place where my glory throne is. Right? There's a bigger picture than just your desert wanderings here right now. There's something bigger happening on the face of the earth. And what you are facing over here, it's because of this. This realm is impacting your realm. Isn't that amazing? We're going to see it every single time. In the Temple of Solomon, very interesting there. David had the inkling to say, God, you've given me a house. You've given me favor. I'm now king here. And I'm living in this beautiful wooden house, a palace. But there's a tent. Please, God, I want to build you a house. And because of that heart of his, God responded and said, David, somebody's going to sit on your throne for all generations. Beautiful, eh? That's where it all kicked in. But then God gave David the instructions for how that temple should look. It's God's house. It's not David's house. And he would finally tell Solomon to build it. He said, then David gave Solomon his son the plans of the vestibule of the temple and of its house, and verse after verse, all the detail. Also his plan for the golden chariot of the cherubim that spread their wings and covered the ark of the covenant of the Lord. All this he made clear to me, Solomon said, in writing from the hand of the Lord, all the work to be done according to the plan. Who gave the designs? God did. The same as with the tabernacle. This is God's design for his house. Now that was phenomenal. That was absolutely incredible. There's two cherubim in the most holy place, 10 meters high, and with their wings touching in the middle and their wings touching the edges of the room, 5 meters in span each. That's massive. Massive, massive. All right? That's there in the holy place. And then on the walls, carved out in the wood, cherubim all around, all around, all around. Right? Same as in the tabernacle. God said they had to be there. God wanted them to know. That's my realm. And they are part of it. There's a spiritual realm, guys. Don't just live like where you are now. There's a bigger picture than what you see over here. There's things worshiping me in my presence day in and day out that you cannot even fathom. It's bigger. Then still, we don't know how they look, eh? There's no picture given of how they look. It's as if Moses assumed, well, for the generations to come, we've made them. You can ask the priest to tell you what you look like. Remember, nobody else could go in there. Only the priest went in to the holy place, and the high priest to the most holy place. So you had to ask one of them, draw me a picture, and they could tell you. But for the rest of the people, they never wrote it down for us. Interesting. But by the grace of God, there's continuous revelation. All right. So I missed a point over there, because I do want to ask the question. We do know they've got wings, and that's about as much. That's about as much at this point. Are they winged creatures? I'm throwing it out because I pondered over it. Are they winged creatures? Yeah, why would they have wings if they could float? I don't know. Yes, and they've got wings. That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah, it's for that reason. Sorry, he's just saying some places they've got 4 wings, some 2, some 6, but they always have wings. That much we have to say. Cherubim always have wings when they're shown. I just wonder if the picture is not more about they're in a higher realm than us. Because anything else that we know has wings, except for the ostriches and for the penguins and for the dodos. But the rest of them fly. They've got wings because they're lifted higher than us. They're from a higher realm than us. I wonder if it's maybe just not that kind of picture. But I would love it if they have wings. I really would. Yeah, so I don't want to throw doubts on that. But you'll see in the rest of the pictures of them that we get later that there's definitely a lot of figurative in it. I don't know if the wings also fall under that category. I really don't. But at least it says they're higher. All right. Then in Solomon's temple, just one thing, we receive no further revelation on the nature or a role of the cherubim here. Like in the tabernacle, there are many cherubim represented in the temple. That's a good point to note. There are many of them, because later we're going to see 3 times there are 4 of them around the throne. But they're not just 4. Always in the temple, in the tabernacle, there are many of them. All right? Again, we are not told what faces they look like, and they still have 2 wings, which in these instances are more clear than in Moses' description. It's only on those 2 that's on the mercy seat that we see them with 2 wings touching. And here in the temple, 2 wings stretching out. It's a bit more clear, but that's as much detail as we get. From this point on, the Psalms would start speaking about God as being enthroned on the cherubim. God who is enthroned on the cherubim. Where would that come from? Why that picture? Enthroned on the cherubim. It's from the Ark of the Covenant, right? Where does God speak from? The glory of God appears there above the wings of the cherubim. He is enthroned on the cherubim, is the picture that we get. And that's going to be confirmed later on in the visions, when more prophets actually get a picture of God in his throne room. Yeah. And then next one is Temple of Solomon. We looked at that. In Isaiah's vision, in Isaiah chapter 6, a very, very well-known passage. In the year that King Uzziah died, it says, For me, always in that story, the bit of a history is important in the wording, because it starts off with saying, in the year that King Uzziah died. And King Uzziah died from leprosy. And he got leprosy on the day that he, as king, a very righteous, very good king, decided it's not just enough to be king. I'm going to walk into the temple as if I'm a priest. And that was a definite no-no. He's not a Levite. He's not from that clan. He's not supposed to be there. But the king in his arrogance thought, man, surely I've got enough favor with God. And he had great favor. God made him great. He was really a wonderful king. And in his arrogance, he walked in there, and the priests came and stopped him and says, no, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And he got angry at them. And in that moment, in his anger, the priests stood back because they saw that leprosy broke out on his face. And they rushed him out of the temple, hear this, not back to his palace, back to another house where for the rest of his life he lived under confinement. And his son Jotham became king on the throne in his place while he was still alive. Pride comes to a fall. Sounds very much like that cherub who had that glory in God's presence, but because of his pride, fell and lost it. And then it's interesting because Isaiah then says in chapter 6, in the year that that king died, that king that thought that he could also reign in the temple, I saw a vision. And I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the palace. No, the throne room. No, the temple. It's a prophecy about Jesus Christ. There will be a king who will reign as priest, as high priest. It will happen like that. But then interesting, we're going to get to the name just now, the Seraphim. But in this vision then, he sees the cherubim above the throne. What's up with that? They've never been there. Above the throne. They've always been under the throne. God is seated on the cherubim, right? So for me, that's the prophecy right there. Jesus Christ, Hebrews says, who for a little while became lower than the angels and then died in obedience to the Father and was raised above all other powers and authorities. So I would read it like that, as the prophecy of him who will be the king as high priest, who was lower than. They've got 6 wings suddenly. And we'll get to the covering just now, but that's quite different as well. So there's definitely much more going on here than we've ever seen about cherubim. This is a great, great, great revelation. But let's get to the name then. They are called Seraphim. And Seraphim means burning ones. Now, for that reason, many people have said, commentaries, that they are snakes. Because in other parts of the Bible, the word burning ones are used for snakes. But it's sort of like saying, Renee, you're a fast one, eh? Oh, look at that fast rabbit going by. Oh, Renee is a rabbit. No, that's not what I said. You fast and the rabbits fast. Yeah, the seraphim's a burning one, and that snake is a burning one. And the word is obviously used for different reasons, for different things, but it's a descriptive word of a thing. Now, Isaiah didn't know what he was looking at. He never comes to the conclusion that they are cherubim. Ezekiel didn't know what he was looking at either until he actually heard one of the angels calling them cherubim, and suddenly, no way, that's the same stuff that was made in the tabernacle. That's the same picture that Moses described in Genesis chapter 3, and the light switched on for Ezekiel because he heard the name. He didn't know what he was looking at. John never calls the cherubim cherubim. It seems that he doesn't know what he's looking at either. He's just describing what he saw. He just calls them living beings. Okay? So to say that these are snakes because of the word burning ones, fiery ones, seraphim, would be a really bad interpretation, I think. And then they've got 6 wings. So we have to get to that part of the story, which is why you're going to need that picture. If you don't have it in your book, everybody got it now. Otherwise, I must just make another copy of it in a moment. So they've got 6 wings, where previously we've only ever seen them with 2. And with 2 of these wings, they cover their faces. Now, if I would stand in front of you like this, what would you think about my state of being at the moment? Concerned, maybe. Eh? I'm hiding. Why am I hiding? Maybe ashamed. In awe. Could well be. Yeah, if I stand like this, I need the loo. These guys, they didn't have their legs crossed, Rob. It's just the feathers, right? Sort of makes me think, yeah, it looks guilty. Looks like I'm covering up something. Why am I covering stuff up, right? In awe of the glory and the holiness of God, definitely, all right? Because in his light, everything comes into the open. Now, right in the book of Revelation, they're going to have 6 wings, but all the wings like this in God's presence. Just in awe of who he is. But there's no fear, there's no covering up. They're not closing. They're just open in his presence. It's a very different picture. Okay? Same 6 wings, they can use it in the same way, but they don't. They're open. In Ezekiel, in one moment, we're not going to see the top wings, but the bottom wings are still closing up. They've only got 4, and with 2, they're open. So that's one of the biggest questions about these 3 different revelations of the same beings in the same presence of God, but with a very different response of how they're open or closed in his presence. And what I share here now, really, take it with a pinch of salt, go chew it over and spit out the bones if you think they are. Really, this is my interpretation of it. And with all humility, I don't say I've got any special revelation from God on this. Nothing. This is just me looking at Scripture, dealing with it. So please chew it as much as you want. But we're going to play with this picture for a moment, put the 3 next to one another and ask what is happening on the face of the earth at this time. So when Isaiah is writing his prophecy, the northern empire was being attacked by the Assyrians and was about to fall. So Israel wasn't 2, right? It was Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And the top empire was being taken by the Assyrians. In the book of Isaiah, as much as in the book of Ezekiel, God then prophesies through the prophet, not just to Israel. He's speaking to kingdoms all around them. He's speaking to Cush, Ethiopia, or to Egypt, to Libya, and he's speaking to the Edomites and to the Midianites and all these guys around them, to Assyria, to the Babylonians, up in the north, to Syria themselves, to Tyre. And in every one of them, God calls out the sins of the nations and he calls them to account. He calls them to account. So just to remember that the picture is not just the prophet speaking to people, right? God makes it clear there's a spiritual realm. There's a bigger picture here. There are archangels over these territories and they are called to account as much as the people who choose to worship those ones. So for me, in the picture over here, what God is saying is things are really broken in the spiritual realm. He's calling these gods to account, saying, you're not doing what I'm telling you to do. You're not reigning over these territories in the way that you should. So in the picture for me, there's shame in the council. When they sit around with God, they're ashamed for what they're doing, because in the light of God, it comes out into the light, and God calls it out and says, this is not right. 100 years later then, Ezekiel gets a very similar revelation, but again, more detail is given. And in this one then, they've got 4 wings, and only 2 of those wings are open. But just a bit more of what he is seeing over there. He sees them with 4 faces each. And these 4 faces are what you have on the cover of your book over there. It's the face of an eagle, and it's the face of a man, it's the face of an ox, it's the face of a lion. These 4 different faces, but every one of them with 4 faces. That's quite strange, right? But a lot in the vision has to do with 4. It's not just the 4 faces, there's also the 4 beings, and the 4 beings stand pointing in different directions. And then under these 4 beings are the craziest thing in Scripture. 4 wheels, a wheel within a wheel. Something like that I picture it as, all right? You're going to have sleepless nights if you look at some of the pictures on the internet trying to describe it. Because not only are these beings covered with eyes inside and out everywhere, but these wheels are covered with eyes all around as well. And then on top of the wings of the cherubim, there's a glassy sea, a crystal sea. And on that is the throne of God. And then really important, Ezekiel looks from the bottom through the glassy sea and he sees the throne of God there. He's at the bottom of it. So in a real great sense, you see what the Psalm says. The structure, all the way from the creator of heaven and earth, above a floor. There's nobody else above that floor. He's on the floor. He's on the throne room. And then under the throne, there's the cherubim, covered with eyes, for me representing many cherubim, just like in the tabernacle and in the temple. They're not just 4, but in every territory, north, east, south, west, there's the cherubim, all those eyes looking at God. And then under that, and again, just my interpretation, the wheels covered with eyes representing the rest of the heavenly host. And for me, the phrasing comes in. That's the wheels that makes the world go round. That's where the things happen and that rolls out on the earth. So for me, that's a picture of the structure of heaven from where Ezekiel is looking at it as a man in the structure. Do with it like you want. But somehow you have to do something with it. That's a challenge because it's a very strange vision. It's a very strange vision. And clearly God is unveiling stuff with it, but again, he's not telling us everything. He's just giving us a glimpse. But the moment in which Ezekiel gets this vision is very significant. When Isaiah got the vision, the northern empire was falling. When Ezekiel got the vision, the southern empire was falling to the Babylonians. And there were already Israelites off in exile in Babylon. And what does he see? He sees the throne room of God on these wheels, able to move around. In his description of this whole vision, he says, the spirit of the cherubim were in the wheels. And wherever the cherubim moved, the wheels moved. Tells you about an authority structure, right? Eh? Very much Rob oversees a church. He's preaching in a direction. We recognize the Spirit of God's leading him. We're following in the direction. There's a unity in our moving together, right? And then he says, but wherever the Spirit wants to move, it goes. So it's never turning. It's always facing in the same direction. That's why there's a wheel within a wheel. It could go this way, that way, this way, that way. And it's always in sync with the throne of God in the cherubim, in the wheels. So who really calls the shots? God. The Spirit of God guides the cherubim, who guides the wheels that influences the earth. And then amazingly, he sees the same vision there in Babylon. Now, what does it say to the prophet and to the nation? It's really the last time you saw it there in the temple. I just want to remind you, you're off in exile. You're not cut off from me. I'm not isolated back there. I'm not an archangel. Hey? My throne is here with you. I'm with you wherever you are. It's such an encouraging thought. Yeah. But then they've got 4 faces, and we'll speak about the faces just now again when we're in the book of Revelation. They've got calves' feet, men's hands, they're covered with eyes, and then the 4 wheels. Just in the entire description of them, it uses images from the earth, saying it's like that, it's like that, it's like that, it's like that. Now, I don't know about you, but God is so creative. I don't see him having to create a spiritual realm out of cutouts from the physical realm. Say, I ran out of ideas, let's give them, those kind of hands, those kinds of feet, those kind of... He's trying to describe something that is out of this world. And in that description, he grabs it. It looked like that. It was like this. But then also, I think it's got meaning for the people that listen to it, like the faces. Those 4 faces represent the greatest of the birds. Is the eagle. It's the king of the sky. The king of the jungle is the lion. And if you're on a farm and you don't have an ox, you're missing out on the strength of the ox. There's nothing like it. You cannot use another animal. He's like the power on the farm. And then over all of those, mankind, the crown of creation. So that would be what I read into that those beings represent the greatest of the great of the earth in any realm. There's something other. There are people who looked at them as a picture of what Jesus might be, like the Gospels say it's like the lion. I don't know, because some commentaries will say the lion is Matthew, some will say, no, the lion is Luke. Some will say that the eagle is John. Most of them agree on that one, actually. But then the man is this Mark because it's deeds, or the man is Luke, no, because he's got attachment to everybody. I don't know if that really stands firm for me. All right. Any questions before we go on? Not. All right. We're just about to break for lunch. Anybody hungry yet? So then this is how it looks now. And just to say, the one thing I missed out on over there is these guys in Ezekiel are as fiery as Isaiah sees it. The description the whole time is there's light, there's fire, lightning shooting out of them and inside of them all around. So it is the fiery ones that he saw. Now suddenly their 2 pairs of wings are gone. The bottom is still covered over. I would say God is working in that council, in the cherubim, cleaning out, weeding out. As much as we see it rolling out on the earth in the 100 years since Isaiah saw it, when Ezekiel sees it, something is happening on the earth because of what is happening in the heavenlies. And God is saying, going to clip those wings. You're no longer going to rule over them. Setting things right in the heavenlies as well. Again, chew on it, please. In the temple of Ezekiel, then, at the end of the book of Ezekiel, there is a plan given by God to the prophet to rebuild the temple that the Babylonians have destroyed. And it's gracious because Ezekiel would have seen the temple that Solomon built. And then because of this great war with the Babylonians, it was broken. And graciously in exile, God gives him a vision and say there's going to be a rebuilding of this temple. They're going to come back 70 years later and they're going to rebuild it, which Zerubbabel then eventually did, a descendant of David. And in that picture, God says to Ezekiel, it was carved of cherubim. He has the vision and he sees it. It was carved of cherubim and palm trees, a palm tree between cherub and cherub. So all along the walls, it's this pattern. Cherub, cherub, palm tree. Cherub, cherub, palm tree. This pattern running all the way. Every cherub had 2 faces. What's up with that, man? Make up your mind. And then interesting, not a switching of the kind of faces, only 2. A human face towards the palm tree on the one side and a face of a young lion towards the palm tree on the other side. So the eagle is completely out, and the lion is completely out. Hey, what's going on over there? They were carved on the whole temple, all around, from the floor to above the door. Cherubim and palm trees were carved. Similarly, the wall of the nave. So all around. And again, whose design is this? God's design. God said, I want them represented there. I want you to fathom something of what is around me, where I am. Okay? I don't know what you're going to do about the faces over there. It's really strange, eh? Because if it's carved in, my one thought is it's two-dimensional, so you won't be able to put 4 faces on. That's just going to be weird, right? Because they're not look. But then at least switch the faces. I don't know. But yeah, keeps us guessing. All right, and then in John's vision, the book of Revelation, there we get a much broader picture, much more detail than in any of the other revelations. It really is so much painted with color and detail all around. So they've got one face each, but the 4 different kind of faces are all there. So one has a face of an eagle, one has a face of a lion, one of an ox, and one of a man. They're in the presence of God. And they're still covered with eyes all around, which in my picture, I see it's 4 of them representing in all of the different areas of the realm, all the different cherubim, all the eyes looking at God. Because in the temple and all of that, there's many, many of them all the time. And then that's how they look suddenly now. But I believe it's because Michael and the archangels are rejoicing. Jesus have come and he had died, and heaven is restored. And the dragon is chucked out. So things in heaven are as they should be, but not yet on the earth. Not yet on the earth. And then these cherubim are in the picture in the book of Revelation from that chapter on right to the end. Much of what John hears when one calls and says, "Come look," one of the cherubs called out, and he saw a white horse running. And then at another time, "Come look," and I saw the bowls being poured out. The cherubim are part of the revelation given to John. As soon as he's in the throne room, they're there the whole time. And he interacts with them as the revelation is given. So it really is, they're not just limited to chapter 4. He's in the throne room where they are. And they must have been awesome. Absolutely awesome. All right, we're going to break for lunch. And in your conversation on that, around the table, speak about some of these things and maybe come back with a comment or a thought. Maybe just the last one over here. Sorry, I saw a note that I made. Just on the picture of these 3. Just again, in terms of the history, what happened. So over there, Israel, the northern empire fell. And you could think it's a traumatic time for the nation. Our northern brothers are there no more. The Assyrians continue to march down into the south until, remember that story of Ezekiel going to bow before God with the words of Sennacherib, who said, "Your city is not going to stand. No other city stood before us." It's the Assyrian commander boasting. They already took the north. They already took everything in between. So Judah is really in stress. This is a traumatic time for them that God gives this revelation of him on the throne in the temple. It's an encouragement. Who's really in charge? Who's really the one calling the shots? Trust me. Over here, when Judah finally falls to the Babylonians, this vision is given. The throne room in heaven, these glorious beings in God's presence. All right? It's an encouragement. It's saying there's a bigger story over here. There's a massive realm in the spiritual. Keep perspective. Who's really in charge? Over here, it's given at the worst time of Christian persecution ever. That's when the revelation is given to John, 100 years after Jesus. All right? Again, the throne room needs to be seen. Who's in charge? Who's really calling the shots? Worship me. Don't fear. So it's very important when these 3 are given. It's critical times. All right.